Welcome to this video tutorial on how to create atmospheric lighting in VRay for Rhino. In this video I've set up a simple scene here with some basic lighting just controlled using a Rhino document sun, which is connected to a sky environment map which is controlling our environment. And currently the scene looks like this. It's quite dark, as you can see. We've got a sky in there, but it's not really any kind of fun lighting going on. It's pretty dull and quite flat in terms of the image itself. And I want to create quite an atmospheric nighttime scene here using artificial lighting to help this building glow and give a sense of atmosphere to the image. Now, to begin to do this, we're going to start by using VRay's lighting tools, which are found in this orange toolbar up here. If you haven't got this toolbar, you can also find these under the VRay panel, under lights there, and here you've got all your VRay lights. Now, the first one we're going to be using is the sphere light tool, which is essentially your most basic light tool. And if we select that option, just draw this out in the scene, and I'm just going to pick a point here and draw out my sphere light like so. You'll see we'll get a kind of light appear, which looks like a kind of ball of light there. Now, to select this, often you'll find you can't select the light from the outside, you just end up selecting other objects. So the best way to select these is by clicking the center of the light, just where this kind of little sun logo is, and there you can see we've selected that light and it appears as a point light there, which we'll kind of zoom in on for now. Now, in order to see what this looks like, we're just going to go to our camera view, which is this little one in the side panel here, and we'll render this out to have a look and see what our light is currently appearing as in the scene. Now, when you start by creating these sphere lights, they come out as a spherical object like so, and we can see that as a ball of light that's glowing in the scene. Now, if we also open up VRay's asset editor, you'll see once you've created this sphere light, if we go to the lighting tab, we'll have the option of the sphere light here, and we can see its intensity, its color, and also its size, which we can adjust there. So if we adjust the intensity, it makes it brighter, and the size makes it bigger and smaller. Now, a lot of times you might want to use the light to create a kind of lighting effect in the scene, but not have a big ball of light glowing in your image. And to do this, we can actually go to the options of our sphere light and make it invisible here. So this will allow us to, if we tick that, just get the effect of the light, but not the actual object itself. Now, you see here we've also still got a bit of a ghost of that light remaining, and this is actually the reflection of the light on the wall behind, and you can kind of see it in the glass up there too. So in these options we can also make sure that it doesn't affect the reflections. If we tick that off, then we just have the lighting effect in the scene. So here you can see now we just have the effect of the light, but no actual spherical object. And this is quite useful when you just want to create a kind of glowing atmosphere, but not have kind of particular balls of light that are visible in the scene. Now, what we're going to do now is we're going to start to move this light around into position, and I want to put it under this kind of walkway I've got going on next to my scene. So let's just select my lighting object like so. We're going to move it into this walkway here like so, and once we've got that into position, let's move it up a little bit. We're just going to have a look and see what that looks like in our asset sort of editor, in our frame buffer there. Now you can see the light's in, but now we've got another problem where we've got this big black ball that's kind of occurring where the light is, and the reason for that is the light is actually clipping through my wall at the back. You can kind of see that here, where the light is just kind of connecting into that wall there, which is causing this sort of shadow from the light. Now, in order to stop this happening, all I'm going to do is just reduce the scale of the light here. So we can open up our asset editor again, go to the size, and let's just put that down to 1 meter for now, like so. And that's the diameter, that size there. So that's kind of what those units will be linked to, your units in your scene, and that will be related to the diameter of that spherical light. And there you can see we don't have that kind of black hole in the scene anymore because it's not clipping with the object. So now we've got it there, let's move it up to the roof of this walkway, something like this, and we'll just zoom out in the scene to see how that looks. And that's kind of creating the effects I want, almost like a downlight in this room. What we can now do is we can take that light, and I'm going to copy it across here. I'm going to sort of center it to these pieces and just use the copy tool, using these kind of blue beams as a guide here to just kind of copy them across like so. And let's do it all the way over to there. There you can see we've got my lights kind of all the way along that piece there, and they're creating a kind of nice glow down effect. Now what you'll find is if you copy a light in a scene like this, we actually don't get any more lights to control in our asset editor. What's happened is they've made a kind of perfect copy of each of them that's controlled by the original light here. So if we change the intensity on this original light in my asset editor, it will change the intensity of all of those lights simultaneously. If we want to create a brand new light, the easiest way is just to make one from scratch rather than copying them in the scene. Now, if we want to start to adjust some of these lights as well, we can tweak the color of them, and I'm going to turn them into a sort of greenish light here to kind of match that kind of green glass I've got in the scene. And let's just tweak the color a bit and also tweak that intensity just to brighten them up a slight amount. So we've got a kind of nice greenish glow in there, and that's sort of creating the effect that I'm looking for in this piece. So that's the kind of introduction to sphere lights and how they might start to add a bit of kind of atmosphere and glow to the scene. As well as adding lights in amongst the building, we can also use them to light up the environment. And something I'll often do is actually create really big balls of light. So let's kind of create this large one here. I'm going to move it off camera, and I'm just looking at my view here. We can kind of minimize this to make it a little bit smaller, just on the left, just so we're kind of moving it out of shot there. Move it down a little bit, and then in my asset editor, let's start to tweak this. So I'm going to make this a kind of reddish color, and then we're going to really up that intensity to give that a glow. And maybe that's a little bit too high. Let's put that on 100 or maybe 120, just to give a kind of nice reddish glow to the scene. I think something you can do is, if you want certain shadows, you can bring it sort of slightly more perpendicular to the object to cast a few of these nice shadows on the geometry as well. What I often do is I might create two big lights almost coming in from different sides of the object. So I've got one from one side, and then for the second one, let's make this a kind of nice bluey color. Up the intensity again, and have that coming in from the other side, maybe a little bit lower there, almost like we've kind of got a two-tone lighting effect going on. And you might want to make that one a bit higher just to kind of give it a sort of sense that it's coming in, or maybe even lower and it's actually kind of casting along the ground slightly. But you can see as we're doing this, it's just giving our object a little bit more kind of dynamic lighting, casting lights in different places. We could always copy these around, move them a bit closer, and you can get some nice lighting effects going on the ground level as well. And usually what I'll do is I'll just create these, and as you can see, I'm just moving them out of shot and playing around until I get the kind of lighting effect that I want. And I think that's kind of getting something closer to what I'm looking for there, which is a nice bit of blue light across that grass in the foreground. You can see here it's sort of picking up again in the reflection, so you always want to go back, check the options, and just make sure it's not appearing in the reflection if you don't want it to. So the light is kind of invisible and it's just casting that lighting effect. So that's sphere lights and different uses we can use them for. Another thing we can play around with is actually creating emissive materials and creating objects that have light in the scene. So the way I'm going to do this is I've got a little window up here, and what we're going to do is I've made a sort of curve in this window. Let's just rotate this a bit so it's kind of parallel to that opening there, and then let's just extrude it out into an object. It doesn't really matter kind of how big this is, but let's do it 0.1 like so. So we've got a little kind of object in there, and then with that object we're just going to put it on its own layer. So let's just move it onto layer 1 just so it's not being controlled by any other layers, and you can kind of see it there in the window. And then I'm going to go to my materials, and instead of creating a light source, we're actually going to create a light material just by going with the plus in the left hand corner, going to materials, going to emissive, which creates the material with an emissive property, i.e. a kind of light property, and then we're going to apply it to that selection. And you can see at the moment I've done that and it's quite dull, but that's because the intensity is on a 1. If I up the intensity to 100, we're then getting a little glow where that material is, and it's kind of casting on the objects around, which is quite nice. And we can play around with the colour again on that. Maybe I want it to be a matching sort of green or even a sort of yellowy tone potentially. I think with this, let's see what kind of works well. A lot of the time you might just want to sort of tailor it to however the scene's looking, but I think maybe a green as well in this might be quite nice. And we're going to up that intensity slightly. Let's put it on a 200 to get a nice kind of glowing effect. And then from there we could always copy it across as well if you want it in those other places. So we can start to kind of create these little glowing eyes in the rest of the building. Let's copy this across to some of these in here. So these are all kind of different ways of doing light materials, adding lights into your scenes and creating these sort of different lighting effects. Now that one's kind of slightly off. Let's just move that into position like so. There we go, and you can see I've got one that's kind of slightly offset there. Let's just move that back into place. Like so. You'll always find with VRay we've got a lot of kind of windows and menus open, so often you're having to juggle around a few of these menus just to get the right view, you can see. But there you can see we've now got those kind of emissive materials in place, which we can then dial in and out using the material properties. So you can make these any pieces of geometry you want. You can kind of tweak them as you go as well and change each of these properties you have in the objects. So you're not just limited to the lights that VRay has on offer. You can also create certain objects with different material properties as well as the lights we're using. Now, one thing that's quite good when you've got direct lights in the scene like this and you want to start to play around with their kind of emission and how they're looking in the scene is actually to give a little bit of glow to these pieces. And we can do that using VRay's lens effects that are found just under the display corrections in your frame buffer here. So as my image is rendering, if I go to lens effects and turn bloom and glare on, which is found here, what this does, you can see there, starts to add a little bit of glow, or bloom as it's called, to the image to sort of blow out the lights and give that kind of hazy effect you often get with them. These are controlled by the size parameter and the intensity parameter here, and you can see as I up the intensity, the level of that kind of glow or bloom is starting to increase, and we can increase or decrease the size of that effect as well, depending on how atmospheric you kind of want the scene to be. There are lots of sort of different parameters we can play around with these. Most of the time I'll start with the kind of size and intensity, and then if we want to go into the more detailed aspects, you can look through these here to add any more kind of extra bits to those. But in a sense, you can kind of do most of the things with these size and intensity barriers, and we can start to bring those up and down to start to tailor the effect to the scene. So you can see there we're getting a bit of glow from our lights. Now, to finish this off, we're just going to finish by adding in a couple more lights into the inside to give a little bit of extra glow into the scene. The way I'm going to do this is, instead of the sphere light, we're going to use the rectangular light tool. I'm going to draw out a little rectangle here, rotate it upwards into position, and then I'm going to move this rectangle inside my geometry, so it's kind of sitting inside the building like so. Now if we rotate this way, and then I'm just going to put it in the middle of the space so we can't see it, what will happen is if we go back to my render, we're probably not going to see anything. You can see there something's happening in the background there, but it's quite subtle, and that's the light probably just casting a light on that back wall. Now what we can do is, if we go into my effects, we've now got my rectangle light. I'm going to change a few options on this. We're going to first sort of make sure that the intensity is a bit higher. We'll put it up to a sort of 200 there. I'm going to make it invisible, and we're also going to make it double-sided, so it's actually firing out on both sides here, which we can see this glow appearing on both sides of my model there. Now we can start to sort of tailor this effect, and you can see at the first case it's happening quite slowly because it's just picking up on those edges of the glass. But if we up the intensity and also up the size of the object, we can start to increase how much that is working in the scene. So I'm going to do that. We're going to up the size a little bit. Oop, not that big. Just tailor that in slightly. So we've got a bit of glow, and it's just creating a sort of inner glow in the building that's kind of coming out on both sides. Now it's going to take a little bit of time to render this out for us to see that effect happening, but you can use this to essentially make kind of inward glowing spaces inside your building, almost bleeding out of the structure, like so. To reduce this time, we can also click that it's not affecting the reflections, which will get that kind of glass effect off, and then we've just got that glow effect kind of happening from inside there as well. One other thing I want to do with this rectangular light tool is we're just going to create another one. We're going to put it in here, and we're going to use it to actually create a few sort of highlights and really intense bits of light in the scene to give us a bit more of a kind of intense lighting effect there. Now it's kind of snapping to random objects, so we just want to make sure it's just creating it there. There we go. Take our light again. This time I'm going to flip it upwards, move it into place. If you're wondering which way the light is going, you'll see there's a little arrow in the middle of the rectangular light tools, and that will tell us which direction the light is facing. So you always want to make sure it's facing in the way that you want it to. So if you need to rotate it round, for example, you might need to select the light and spin it 180 degrees in order to get it facing the right way. Now, I'm going to put this one just in this alcove here, and we're going to use this to get a bit of highlights into our scene. So I'm just going to put it there, and then same again as we've done before, we're going to make it invisible. We're going to turn off the reflections, and then I'm going to really up the intensity, and let's put that on a 5000 for now. So we're getting this nice streak on the edge, and we're creating this little kind of well of light in this atrium space here. And this is really just to create a little bit of drama in that entrance, to just kind of give it a bit of significance, make it feel like it's the kind of important part of the building that we're entering there. The nice thing is, once you've made all of these lights, you can then just start to dial them in and out depending on the intensity you want of each one. So let's say we want the inner glow to be a bit more. I can go back to my inner lights, and we might want to rename these as sort of interior or exterior. And we can start to kind of adjust these. So maybe we want this to be brighter. Let's put it up to a 900, but also warmer. So I'm going to make it a little bit orangey there. We could start to think, okay, maybe I want my kind of emissive material to be a bit higher. So let's up that as well to a 500. So you can start to play around with all of these pieces to give them more of a glow, to dampen them, all depending on how you want the scene to look. And I'd always recommend adding these in and then just spending a bit of time just tweaking them slightly until you've got the effects that you're wanting to achieve with that. And I think somewhere around here is getting to a place that I'm kind of happy with. I think I'm going to just dim that interior light down slightly. I think it's a little bit too bright now. And then if you wanted to just make sure that bloom and glare is working, quite often you might have to turn it off, turn it back on again, and then it will usually reset itself. And I think somewhere like that is kind of working well. I think what I'm going to do with this as well is, now I've got it to this stage, I'm actually going to take off a few of these lights I've put in here. Let's just delete a couple of them. And I think we might just have the one actually there that we'll be using, and then the rest will just be from internal glows inside. And I think something like that I'm kind of happy with there. So once you've done that and you're kind of happy with the effect, obviously you want to make sure the bloom and glare is working, and then you can just render out the image as you usually would. And you can do that just by obviously making sure the kind of dimensions you're rendering it out at. I'm just going to have a look in the settings, check my render output. I'm going to render this at 2000 pixels, I think, there. And then just as you usually would, we can then just hit render to start rendering that image out. And quite often you might need to just double check the bloom and glare is working as it begins to render. It might obviously make sure you are in the right camera angle when you're rendering out as well, so you're not rendering a small detail. Often can happen when you're sort of zooming in and out of different views in VRay. But there we go, we're now rendering the scene out. I'm going to make sure that bloom and glare is on, wait for it to kind of effect and refresh itself. and there we have our kind of image rendering out. So that was just a quick video tutorial on how to create atmospheric lighting in VRay using sphere lights, rectangle lights and the bloom and glare lens effects to give a sense of atmosphere, a sense of glow and a sense of drama to your images. Thank you for watching.